Chapter 9. The Origins of Heredity. Mendel and the Garden Pea Experiment.
I'd like to begin today's lecture by asking a few simple questions. Why do people look different from cats, from horses, and from birds? Why do people look different from each other? Why do you look different from your sister or brother? The answer to all these questions lies in the genes of people and animals. Your genes provide biological instructions that control how you look, how you function, and even partly how you behave. Genes determine how every living creature on Earth appears, how it functions, how it reproduces, and generally how it behaves. Now, genes are found inside the cells of the body and are passed down or inherited from one generation to the next. You may, for example, have inherited the color of your hair from your mother, or your ability to roll your tongue from your father. Or you may have inherited some other interesting trait you may or may not be grateful for from your great-great-great-grandfather or grandmother. Who knows? Inherited traits or abilities are determined by combinations of genes that are different for every human being. Although each individual is really quite unique, it's interesting to note that most genes are common to every person on Earth. In fact, humans share many of the same genes with other kinds or species of animals, from the simple little fruit fly to our close cousin, the apes. Do you realize that the small African ape, called the bonobo, shares 97% of the same genes we have? I don't know whether that's good news or not for us, or for the bonobos. The study of genes is a branch of the field of biology called genetics, and the scientists who study how genes are inherited and passed from one generation to the next are called geneticists. The field of genetics actually dates back to the mid-1800s, but most of what we know today about genes and about genetic disorders has been learned in only the last few decades. But don't let me jump ahead to what's going on in modern genetics before we acknowledge and briefly examine the work of a pioneer in biology, Gregor Mendel, who lived from 1822 to 1884. Mendel carried out some of the earliest experiments in genetics by studying the simple pea plant. Between 1856 and 1863, he grew more than 28,000 pea plants, and he kept very careful records on these 28,000 plants. From these records, he saw clearly that there was a predictable pattern by which plant traits or characteristics were passed from one generation of the pea plant to the next, a pattern that had never been reported before. He explained the patterns in principles or laws. Today, these principles are known as the Mendelian laws of heredity. Because we're talking about Gregor Mendel, let me make an aside and tell you something interesting about Mendel that might make him seem more real to you. In 1851, he was sent to the University of Vienna to study mathematics and experimental biology, the two subjects that were to make him so famous throughout the world. However, after 2 years of studying at the University of Vienna, he left the university. He was extremely nervous and uptight about taking examinations. It seems that this extreme nervousness about taking examinations kept him from completing his degree. Now, taking examinations makes everyone nervous, but apparently this disability did poor Gregor Mendel in terms of his university studies. However, the examination disability did not stop him from conducting his research or from becoming one of the most famous scientists of all time. Now, where was I? Yes. I was talking about genes and the passing of certain traits and characteristics from one generation to another. Many of your individual traits, including the color and shape of your eyes, the texture of your hair, and even your height and weight, resemble those of your parents. Your parents have passed traits on to you, and this passing of traits from parents to offspring, as we know, is called heredity. From the earliest ages, people have been interested in studying and understanding how heredity works. People have been interested in learning how they could alter crop plants, like corn, to give corn the traits that would make the corn crop more plentiful and better tasting. And today, they can do that. Humans also have always been interested in learning how to improve the breeding of domestic animals to make them more valuable and useful. In the case of racehorses, for example, owners want to breed strong, beautiful, and fast horses that can run faster than their competitors' horses can run. The famous racehorse Seabiscuit was offspring or son of a very famous champion racehorse called Man of War. Now, undoubtedly, Man of War passed on traits of strength and speed that helped his son Seabiscuit race faster than so many other horses, even though Seabiscuit was a small horse when compared to the other larger horses he raced. Okay, well, where was I? Before DNA and chromosomes were discovered, when Gregor Mendel began his experiments, heredity was one of the greatest mysteries of science. As I mentioned previously, Mendel studied science at the University of Vienna, and there he learned how to use mathematics to try to explain natural phenomena. While in Vienna, he studied the work of a man called Knight, another early pioneer in the study of heredity and genetics. Knight had crossed, or mated, a variety of the garden pea that has violet flowers with a variety that had white flowers. To his surprise, he found that all of the offspring of the crosses had only violet flowers. However, when two of the violet-flowered offspring were crossed or mated, their offspring produced both violet and white flowers. The white color trait had reappeared in the second generation of the plant. Now, Knight was puzzled by this reappearance of the white flowers in the second generation, and he was unable to explain why this had happened. Mendel decided to repeat Knight's work on the garden pea plant, called Pisum sativum in Latin, but he decided to apply his knowledge of mathematics and statistics to help him predict the results or the outcome of the crossbreeding of the white flowering and the violet flowering plants. Now, you might ask why Mendel used the simple garden pea rather than a rose or some other flowering plant. Also, why did he use a pea rather than an animal to study the puzzle of heredity? Well, Mendel had a number of good reasons for choosing to study the pea plant. For one thing, the plant was readily available and plentiful where he lived in Austria. Second, the peas could be cultivated quickly and with little effort. And most important, from a mathematician's perspective, the garden pea plant produced a large number of baby pea plants or offspring. Actually, it seems that the garden pea was a very good subject for studying heredity for several other reasons as well. The garden pea plant has many traits that have two clearly different forms that are easy to tell apart, such as color. Let me give you an example. The color of a pea plant is either violet or white. There is no intermediate form of color. Next, the mating of garden pea flowers can easily be manipulated, so Mendel was able to control the mating of the plant easily and then observe the offspring plants that resulted from the mating. As I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, Mendel grew more than 28,000 plants and recorded the many offspring of these plants. And he did all this counting and record keeping long before computers were available for record keeping and statistical analyses. Just imagine. We are still benefiting today from the early research done by Gregor Mendel. As a result of his research, today we understand much more about genetics and heredity, though there is still so much to be learned. For instance, we know that genes are tiny biochemical structures inside each cell that determine particular hereditary traits, such as eye color, blood type, maybe intelligence, and so on. But we must remember that the gene only gives the potential for the development of a particular trait. How this potential is achieved or realized depends partly on the interaction of the gene with other genes, and it depends partly on the environment. For example, a person may have a genetic tendency toward being overweight, but the person's actual weight will depend on a number of environmental factors, such as how much and what kinds of food the person eats. Yes, we are what we eat, and thanks to the fact that our ancestors ate and mated, we are. But then it's almost time for lunch, and my inherited hunger trait must be reminding me to end our talk and let you and me go to lunch. I'll see you next time.